Hello and welcome to my channel Polyglot Reading. My name is David and usually I'm talking here about classics and other books worth reading, mostly books from the German, Italian, English, French or Yiddish literature. However, today's video is a bit different. As you can see, I have a guest for an interview today and I'm very happy to have with me today Gianni Solla, the Italian author of the novel The Notebook Thief, a novel that was published in its Italian original in 2023, and right now in fall 2024, the English translation was just published. I have already made a review video of the novel in the main three languages of my channel, in German, Italian, and English, so you might want to check it out. I put the links in the description box. But today, now I have the honor of talking to the author himself. So, Gianni, thank you very much for granting me this interview. Welcome to my little channel, and I must say that I feel quite honored, and I have no idea how many of my viewers already know you or know a little bit about you, so maybe it's a good idea to ask you to briefly introduce yourself. So maybe not going into the details of every single year from your kindergarten days until now, but the most important key facts and milestones of your life.
First of all, David, thank you so much for this invitation. I've had the opportunity to look at what you normally post on your channel, and I've been impressed by the passion and intelligence with which you review the books you recommend. So it's an honor for me to be here, to talk to you, and to know that you've already presented and recommended my book to your viewers. My name is Gianni Solla, and I live in Naples in the south of Italy. I am 50 years old, or rather I will soon be 50. I am married, we have a son, and I have been writing for many years. For me, writing is my way of deciphering the world. Everything I see is created for me through writing. I have published 4 novels. This is the 4th one. I started with a small local publisher, and then gradually grew bigger. The current novel is the first book of mine to be translated, and that is an incredible feeling for me. I feel very happy. I would never have thought that.
Well deserved, very well deserved, I'd say. Oh, so that's a nice coincidence. I'm almost the same age. I'm 52 years old.
That's almost the same age.
Yes, exactly. So thank you very much, Gianni, for the introduction. And now let's talk a little bit about your work as an author. How did you get into writing? Was it always your dream job to be an author? And is this your main profession, or did you get there by some detour?
No, in the sense that writing is not my main profession. I work in the IT industry with computers as a programmer. I've been working in the IT department of a company for many years now. And no, I never believed that writing could become my profession or that it was a real profession at all. I've always believed that writing is basically stolen time, that it's something close to piracy, something almost illegal, not allowed, because I'm always trying to write something that, how should I put it, something that shouldn't really be talked about. If I made it my main job, I would have to think about how to please the audience. I'd have to worry about understanding the readers what they want to read. I'd have to ask myself questions about how many copies I can sell, and so on, and I wouldn't enjoy that anymore. Instead, I prefer to take a risk, a small risk, to play with something that is a story that might not be very marketable, but that is a story I want to write that doesn't have to follow the fashion of the moment. So, in short, I never call it a job. For me, it's something different. I see it as a gift. I feel very lucky to have found a publisher who wants to publish my books, and to have found readers who have started to read even my earlier books. And I feel very lucky that I can be your guest today, and that I can have so many interesting conversations and meet so many people. Hence, I want this to remain a great gift from fate, from the universe, writing, the opportunity to write and publish books. I try very hard, more than for a job. If it was really my job, I would probably do worse and less. Because I don't want to work, actually I don't like work. I believe that writing should simply be fun, that it should be a spontaneous process, and that you don't have to write if you have nothing to tell, if you don't want to tell a story. I don't want to feel obliged to write. It should remain a fascinating game for me. Writing really is a game for me. I smile a lot when I'm writing. After every book, there's quite a long period of marketing anyway. So you have meetings and reviews and so on. No, I don't want to live it as a job. I want it to always be a gift for me. I am still amazed when people come to my book launches. It's incredible for me. I would never have thought that.
Oh, quite interesting. So, for you, writing is more of a passion than an obligation. And I see if you separate writing from work and from duty, you can certainly have more freedom to write about what's close to your heart, or you can talk more easily about taboos or break them while writing. But it's very different from an obligation from a job. You said that you work in the IT industry and do programming, so you do have a more technical background. And from your point of view, is this an advantage or a disadvantage for a writer? Or are these completely separate worlds that have nothing to do with each other?
Yes, I've actually often asked myself the question how much these two aspects of my life do overlap, and I found an answer because when I'm programming, I'm writing code, and when I'm at home, I'm writing novels. But in both moments of my life, I'm writing things, and I find that the process of writing itself, the blank sheet of paper that then becomes either a program or a poem, a short story, a chapter of a novel, that writing always has this incredible power to change things. When I write a program, this program sets in motion the processor of the computer. And when I write a novel, it sets my heart in motion and perhaps that of the reader too. Writing always has this incredible ability to reveal, to unveil, to move. Writing is always magic. Every time we write something on a piece of paper, something happens.
Thank you for the explanation. I think I got it. I think it's a nice analogy that in both activities, programming and writing, there's a similar process of turning a thought into a form of language, a code or a written language. A very nice analogy. Okay, let's talk a bit about your novel, The Notebook Thief, if that is okay with you. In my opinion, that is an educational and liberating novel, a liberation from physical and mental shackles, a story that impressed me because it touches both the emotions and the mind. And in my experience, many books with a captivating story like this, they leave the reader wondering whether there is a real core, a real event behind the story that is being told. So, to put it more bluntly, the question is, what role do real historical events play in the plot of the novel? So, what was the inspiration for the character of Davide, and is there a real core, a real story behind the novel, or is it a completely fictional story?
Yes, that's a question I'm often asked. The novel exists because there is the real story of Torah and Pisilae, the place where the novel is set with all its historical references. I found out about this story by chance when I was trying to research it myself. I heard about this story by chance and I kept coming back to it because there was something very poignant about it for me. This story about 36 Neapolitan Jews who were taken into this kind of exile, which was actually forced labor in agriculture, in this very small village called Torah and Pisilae, which is in the province of Caserta, about 60 to 70 kilometers from Naples. It's a very small village, high up in the mountains, a medieval place, really very beautiful. The more I thought about this story, the more I felt a kind of melody inside me. I saw a movement. I saw these boys because only men were brought, simply because the local mayor, during the fascist period, had asked the provincial administration to send men to work because the Italian men were at war, and so they brought the Jews who couldn't go to war because they were Jewish. I saw these events and found them very inspiring. When I started thinking about the story, not so much the real story, but the story as I imagined it, I didn't want it to be a travel story. That is, I didn't want it to be told by one of the Jews that were brought from Naples to Torah and Pixili, but I wanted the story to be told by one of the inhabitants of Torah and Pixili. This story that must have been seen by the people as small, or rather a great misfortune for this place, because nobody wanted Jews, because this only happened in Torah and Pixili. In other places in Italy, there was no such thing, that is, no Jews were brought there. And so it was a strange thing. The locals could even have seen it as a bad omen. But I wanted this apparent misfortune to be a stroke of luck for this place. And so it was, because the Jews who came brought new life, they brought a different culture in addition to the one that was already there. I wanted to portray this diversity as an asset. It was a great advantage to be able to mix. I firmly believe that right now the most advanced civilizations, societies, and cities are the ones that have the greatest mix of cultures and languages. Just look at Berlin. So it was a form of asset, of wealth. I like this idea, and then I visited this place often because I wanted to be precise. And then there is the fact that this place is so small and that this history has very narrow boundaries, that it is not a very well-known history, the history of these Jews who were brought to Torah and Pixili. And yet I felt it very deeply, and the inhabitants of the place are still deeply touched by this history today. So, in my opinion, it has become a very beautiful story. The character Davide, the protagonist, never existed, but the whole story is essentially real, from the arrival of the Jews to their hiding place in the forest after September 8th, so I have reconstructed everything, I hope, in the best possible way.
Thank you, Gianni. Very interesting to learn that there's this kernel of truth, this extraordinary incident of the Jews being sent to Torah and Picili to work on the land, and that this actually existed. You mentioned the main character, and I would like to talk a little bit about this person, this Davide, who is also the first-person narrator. And Davide holds a particular fascination for me, not only because he has the same first name as me, or almost the same, so he has the Italian form with an E at the end, but also because there is an immense personal development, almost an extraordinary metamorphosis of his personality, which could also present the author with the challenge of making this person coherent and credible despite this great change. But for me, this is precisely one of the book's strengths, namely that the voice of the first-person narrator, the voice of this Davide, it's always credible, even if Davide undergoes significant personal and intellectual development. And I think there's this danger for an author that Davide, the pig's keeper, comes across as too intellectual at the beginning of the novel, that is sort of in an incredible way, or that in the end Davide the actor might come across as a bit too primitive. But that's not the case, not either way. So you did a really good job of avoiding these dangers or pitfalls, but I didn't understand how exactly you did it. So could you tell us a little bit about how you approached and mastered this challenge?
You know, David, a lot of people have defined the book as a Bildungsroman, or a story of transformation, and that's all true if we want to try and put a label on the novel. But I have my own opinion about it, after thinking a lot, after talking to so many people, after talking to myself, and I rather say that it's the novel of a revelation, in the sense that the Davide of the first page and the Davide of the last page are basically the same person, and he was always the same person. He just didn't have the means at the beginning to reveal his true nature to the world. And he had to acquire these means first, through study, through practice, through the incredible fascination that Nicholas exerted on him, one of the Jews who were in a group that was brought there. But in the end, Davide's transformation is only an apparent transformation. In fact, it is just a revelation to the world of the person he always was. Why do I see it that way? Because I've always said that Davide was like a can of gasoline, so to speak, and Nicholas was the spark, the fire, but Davide already had all the gasoline, the fuel in him. And if Nicholas hadn't come, someone else would have come, or maybe he would have caught fire through spontaneous combustion, because Davide was full of content. But he had to find a way to show himself. And Nicholas was one of the possible ways in which the world showed itself to Davide, and Davide could then also show himself to the world. So it was easy for me, because I always had this idea. That is, when I was writing, I knew what kind of Davide I was dealing with. I knew that he was illiterate, but I knew that he had a sharp view of the world, that he was very intelligent, and so it was possible for this concept of the novel to be viable, for his acumen, for his intelligence not to be eclipsed, so to speak. At least that was my attempt. Maybe I was wrong, but that was my idea of this character from the very first page.
You interestingly used the word revelation, just as I used the word metamorphosis. So there are different words, but I don't think the difference is actually very big, because metamorphosis is also a process where the main substance remains the same. If you talk about the process of metamorphosis in insects, so everything is already there in the genetic code. It isn't remains the same genetic code, but it only becomes visible in a certain form first, and then there's this metamorphosis, a transformation into another form. But the genetic material, the innermost being, remains the same, and so perhaps both words fit here too. Let's talk a bit about the theater. The theater plays an important role in the novel. For example, in David's career as an actor, he becomes a really celebrated and famous, successful actor. But there is also a quote from a theater play, a quote from Richard III, from Shakespeare's play Richard III, a quote that I have thought about a lot. And this quote is a key quote that I think has a function as a sort of an identity mark or a trademark of Nicholas, of the Jewish boy. But I was wondering whether there's also a somewhat deeper symbolic connection between the play Richard III and your novel. I think there is one obvious parallel at the surface, because both Richard III and Davide both have this physical disability. They are sort of crippled, lame, but I find it very difficult to associate Davide, the hero of your novel, with the ugly, vicious, manipulative traits of Richard III. So is there a connection that I just don't manage to see? Or is it just an ironic game in which the outward resemblance is deliberately used, but the character is highly contrasting? I'm a bit at a loss here. Could you help me a little bit here with that?
No, actually, there's no connection, and I had no intention of overlapping the stories or using the metaphor of the great figure of Richard III for Davide. I wasn't interested in that. Sure, there was the coincidence of lameness, that they were both lame. At a certain point, they're both mocked. David is mocked because he's lame like Richard III. There are dogs barking at him, but that's not the point. I was actually interested in the power of the words of this quote from the play. I was interested in that because at a certain point, I had to write something into the novel, as beautiful words as possible, so that even an uneducated swineherd would be impressed by the power and beauty of the words. I then looked for quotes that could be of such a nature that even someone who has never read anything like that would be thunderstruck. You know, David, even if you've never listened to music, classical music, and you listen to Beethoven, the power comes to you. You don't need a lot of instruments. Then, of course, as with anything, the more you study, the better you appreciate things. And so I was looking for words of tremendous power, and I could look for them in Dante and Shakespeare. It's not like I had too many alternatives, but when I found this quote, I was thunderstruck. And so that's what I used. Then there was this overlap. I saw the point that Richard III was also lame, but that's not the main reason for my choice. Above all, I realized that I couldn't write the words for this key quote myself. I could only be the narrator, but not make it up, because the same thunderclap Davide felt at those words, that was mine too. It had to be real. I wanted to bring Davide into the world of real literature, into the world of real theater, and so it was necessary for him to hit some very big words from the real theater world. Then there's another thing, David, in terms of the theater. Like my Davide, I write monologues for the theater, so I know a bit about it, not a lot, but just last year I had the honor of having one of my monologues performed in a big theater here in Naples, the San Isidro Theater. The last play I wrote is called Via Senza Amore 23. It's the story of an employee of the Naples Land Registry. The Land Registry is the office that looks after the houses, the apartments in the city of Naples, and this man reconstructs a little of his life through the addresses, through the toponymy of the city. So it's a very poetic monologue, And so let's say I'm very close to the things Davide writes for the theater.
Thank you very much for this explanation. I think it makes perfect sense to choose such a compelling quote that easily explains and justifies Davide's fascination with language and with theater. And of course, as a writer for the theater, you are in a perfect position to make the right choice. I want to go a little deeper into the subject of theater because Davide's life really takes a whole new turn when he becomes part of this amateur theater group that puts on stage plays that they wrote together, and which is a very interesting collective approach from the point of producing literature. And that made me really curious as to whether there were any real role models for this kind of collective writing of theater pieces in Naples in the 1940s or 1950s, or is this an invention of yours?
Back then, in Naples in the 1950s, actually still today, Naples had a great theatrical tradition. There was the Scarpetta family, Filippo, then Toto, who were theater and then television actors. It was a great tradition. It was a theater that came from popular comedy. It was a tradition, and there still is the Neapolitan theater, a very traditional theater. But I also wanted to introduce an element of breaking with tradition, of breaking the rules. I wanted to introduce a little bit of provocation. Of course, there were also avant-garde plays at the time that stood in contrast to traditional theater. It has to be said that Naples was taking a different cultural path from the rest of Italy at the time because we were liberated and occupied by the Americans, and so we absorbed lots of their culture. That changed Naples immediately. Even today, we still play the blues in Naples. In Naples, we had musicians like Pino Daniele, James Sinise, who have an almost American tradition, who have combined the Neapolitan origins with the new American ways that has arrived. So, we are also used to looking to America, to the new culture. Naples is ahead of many other places because we are more receptive, not because we are better, but for historical reasons, because we are used to welcoming new things. For example, in some traditional Neapolitan songs like Tamaraya Tenera, you can find small insertions of American words, which is all very interesting. Because Davide, when he starts acting, plays a traditional Neapolitan role called Pulcinella in his first performance. He makes his first appearances with this role, which is a traditional Neapolitan character, and then he will start to write his own texts. So there is still a period of confrontation with tradition before he emancipates himself, before he is able to write things himself. It's as if he actually studied things. He wasn't completely self-taught. So that's something I want to say. However, he has had a path of growth, albeit independently, not in a real theater school, but still he has collected some ideas before he was able to write something himself. Also, he's just going to do something novel-like, something that's a little bit about Freud, about himself, about his life story about theater. In the theater, everything is fiction. As soon as you start telling the truth in the theater, nobody believes you anymore. Everyone thinks you're lying because that's the point. The lie is the stuff that the story is made of, the narrative. So he was amazed, David, he was amazed at this transformation of the word that takes place on stage. He narrated his life out of a need to explain it to himself, but people, the audience, thought he was acting. In the last part of the novel, when his limp is removed by an operation, he's had a minor orthopedic operation. He starts to limp for effect because he's now also completely in this character that he had started to play. So I tried to superimpose life in theater exactly. And another thing about the theater, in the first performance he plays in an apartment, which I also did. I've done readings in an apartment, so it's my own experience. He realizes that he's imitating Nicholas. That is, at that moment he realizes that he can really transform himself through the theatrical exercise. And then he also starts to become more convincing, maybe even more cynical. He really starts to play Nicholas. So when he goes to the theater, he transforms into Nicholas.
So, if I understand it correctly, there is a need to connect with the roots of the craft and with oneself, also to realize the transformative potential of this process that is taking place on stage, the process of getting to this point after this revelation, this transformation is possible. Another question about the plot of the novel, perhaps less philosophical. It's probably a bit more trivial, but I think many readers will ask themselves this more trivial question: why we don't learn anything more about the further fate of Davide's family. So why he himself obviously has no interest in learning what happened to his parents and his sister. Of course, he has experienced a lot of suffering. He has been rejected by his family, and he has also undergone a significant transformation or revelation. But this complete lack of interest is a little bit surprising. So, how do you think about this? How would you explain to readers that this part of the story was left out of the novel? Like it looks like almost a black hole. Can you explain this a little bit to us?
Actually, Davide does ask a few questions about his family when he returns to Torah and Pixili. He talks about it with one person, a young woman who rents him a room, so he already gets 2 or 3 minimal pieces of information. And then he returns to his parent house before he leaves, and that's where he discovers Nicholas. There is also something unspoken, but when I wrote this part one was very torn. I had the character Davide returning to his birthplace in Torah and Pixili. I told myself that if he came back, even to visit his father, it would be a story of forgiveness. The character would then change too much. There are 2 conceivable scenarios. Either the father is alive, he goes there, and no matter how he talks to him, the mere fact that he returns to him already means a kind of forgiveness. Or the father is dead, he goes to your father's grave, and that also somehow means that you have forgiven him. But I think in this situation, forgiveness is a luxury that this character, Davide, could not afford, because then he would have lost the power that led him away from Torah and Pixili. I wanted him to stay true to himself. I wanted him to stay even unpopular. David, even unpopular. I wanted him to not take a step towards anything other than his own desire. Also, in the first part, one told the story of Davide, Nicola, and Teresa with a little side story about the 3's families of origin. But as soon as the first part ends, as soon as they leave Torah and Pixili, all 3 are, as I say, alone and lost in the universe. The further apart they were, the less they knew what had become of the others. The more I felt this pull, this magnetic force that tended to unite them, to bring them back together. I wanted the only reason in the world for David to go to Torah and Pixili to be Nicholas. Nicholas is the main reason for the whole novel. He's the primary driver, and I didn't want to mix that motif with anything else. I wanted Davide to be even somewhat bad, an unlikable character who is never quite in the favor of the audience, the readers. Davide is not a positive character. He's not. Davide is a character who, in order to grow and find his own way, leaves scorched earth behind. He burns everything, burns his past, denies it, and keeps it up until the end. That's why I really wanted to make this decision. I knew some people wouldn't like it, but I think it was the right thing to do. From this point, I then took the strength for the last part. When he meets Nicholas, who is close to death, when he can talk about nature, when they both, Nicholas and Davide, choose nature as a form of religion, because they have abandoned all religious beliefs, but also the social ones that society imposes on you. We are talking about a strongly patriarchal family of origin, a family from the 1940s, whereas now they are building a family based on friendship. Today we would say a queer family, a patchwork family. I wanted to show a completely different family model to the traditional model of southern Italy, the place where I now live. So I introduced a very strong element of rupture, and I did it consciously and coherently, I hope. In short, I at least tried. I was aware of it. I knew what I was doing, even if, as I said, not everyone notices it immediately. Davide returns to his parent house, and there he meets Nicholas. So before he leaves Torah, he returns to his parent house. He makes this gesture. But it's not love for his parents that draws him there. It's not that. He accuses his mother of never having made up her mind in life, so much so that he uses this model in one of his monologues and makes fun of his mother and sister. I imagine him in the theater as a kind of stand-up comedian, doing a kind of theater in which he makes fun of his life, his family, of everyone else. Davide is a deeply wounded character. He was hurt by life because he wasn't accepted, because he had this problem of lameness, and through theater, he got revenge for everything.
Thank you, Gianni. Very convincingly explained. You're absolutely right. I think this way the story is more coherent, and I fully understand that reconciliation or a forgiveness scene with the father would have been implausible and even unnecessarily melodramatic, I'd say.
Yes, and it would also have been damaging to the economy of the figure. It would have lost much of its power.
Okay, so we have now talked a lot about the novel, but maybe we can now talk a little bit more about the author himself, if that's okay with you. You are not new to writing. Before The Notebook Thief, you had already published at least two novels, Il fiuto dello squalo e Madre Tempesta. And I think you mentioned a third one. Yes, there's a third one. So there are now four novels in total. But unfortunately, the novels before The Notebook Thief are not yet available in English or German. But I'm still a little curious. Are there any thematic or formal connections between your four novels? So, is there something like a trademark, Gianni Solla, or a common theme, or a type of protagonist or a family constellation that can be found in all your novels, or are they all very different and individual?
The stories are certainly different, although family is my favorite topic. I really like writing about family problems, the famous dysfunctional families. They make me laugh a lot. There is no real connection between the last two novels, but there is a microscopic link, a common object, which is the notebook's pieces of writing. They play a role not only in the latest novel. In the novel Madre Tempesta, which was published in 2021, the main character called Jacopo is a boy, a child. The father of this protagonist has a butcher's shop, he is a butcher, and this child went into the cold room, into his father's cold room, with notebooks and paper, locked himself in there, and wrote things on paper. He wrote everything down. He wrote sort of poems, micro-stories about his family. He also wrote them on sheets of paper, which were then used to wrap the meat. His father used these written sheets to wrap his goods. And so this little boy's poems traveled around the neighborhood as packaging for pieces of meat. So there was something about writing. I believe that writing, notebooks as objects and as a symbol for writing, are something very primal for me. They are part of my own personal mythology, that of writing and education. I really like protagonists who learn something. I like the fact that the personal and individual growth of a person is accompanied by didactic, artistic growth, and that the growth in cognitive skills consists of doing a thing better, which then also makes you a better person. So I always try to let my characters grow in practical life because that also helps them to grow as personality. And when I write, I think you said it in the beginning, I only write in the first person. All my novels are written in the first person. So the protagonist not only has to bear the burden and responsibility of being the protagonist, but he or she also has to think properly, because his thought becomes my sentence. It becomes the actual material of the novel. So I demand that the protagonists make an effort, that the protagonists of my novels take a close look at life, that they take a good look at what the world is like, what there is to see. So I want very interested people, people who are passionate about studying, who have a desire to improve themselves, and who have an important critical faculty, which is to admit the truth to themselves, to admit their weaknesses and fears, because weaknesses and fears are cracks on the surface. When I find a crack, I don't try to repair it, to smooth it over. I stick my fingers in and open it up. I try to go deep. I want to see how far I can go, so my characters must not be afraid to dare. Even if it's about familiar settings and my characters don't make any grand gestures, but in their small lives they have to go deep. Then writing is like spelunking, like the art of going underground. When I like to read a great writer, it is because I know that he has gone to a place where I have not yet arrived, because he has gone deep. Even if he has never left his home, he is telling something that happens in his home, but he has gone into a very dangerous territory, that of his own fears, his own sense of inadequacy, into the even more dangerous territory of his own desires, which are sometimes very dangerous. So that is what I, as a reader, expect from literature. In my small attempts at writing, I try to achieve the same thing as an author.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. So the notebooks and the activity of writing and reflecting are something like a leitmotif. I think this German word is also used in Italian and the English language. And I absolutely agree with you that the act of writing has a huge mental impact. It helps to think properly and but also to be honest with ourselves. You mentioned other authors, and we'll come back to this in a moment to talk about which other authors had an influence on you. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the success, the enormous success that the novel The Notebook Thief has had. And so, with this novel, you have achieved for the first time a truly international breakthrough, and so the novel has been translated into at least 12 languages. So my congratulations, very well deserved. And I think this is certainly a very exciting moment for an author. But what do you think was the recipe for success for this novel? How did you manage to suddenly get the world's attention for this novel? So what was different from the previous ones? Did you do something completely different, or is it all just inexplicable coincidence and fate?
So, yes, my life is determined by chance. I'm very surprised and happy when I see posts about my book from Finland or Germany on Instagram. I'm overjoyed because I can never have imagined that one of my novels will be translated. I'm talking honestly, that's not false modesty. As I said, I'm an employee in life. I do a completely different job, so this writing thing is my passion. It's a gift I receive from the universe. I think it worked, or at least the story itself aroused interest. That is, the event that happened in this small Italian village here in the province of Caserta. I think that's the key, that this historical situation has aroused interest, and also because it's probably easier for foreign publishers to imagine selling a story that is so clearly defined in terms of space and time. So, southern Italy, the immediate post-war period, Naples. In short, there are many factors that I think have contributed to publishers' interest in this story. And then, of course, I hope that they like the way it was written, my way of writing. If you've read the novel, you'll know that I use short sentences. I'm a great deleter. I always delete and cancel a lot. Reading is an exhausting activity, more exhausting than writing in my opinion. I'm a reader, and I don't like it when I read chapters and chapters where nothing happens, where the author doesn't tell me anything. Now, I don't need action books. I don't need a lot of things to happen, but I need the feeling that if the author doesn't have so much to give on this particular page at this moment, then surely something of substance will come very soon. So I tried to leave out everything that wasn't essential, and I wanted only the meaningful sentences to remain at the end. I did a lot of sifting, and I hope that the way I've written has also, in a sense, encouraged interest in the book. So I wouldn't say that it's all just a result of chance. I would like to take a little bit of credit, too, for my writing.
Yeah, but this is something that you can really tell from reading your text. One senses that you're a great deleter. That there are no superfluous words or no pure filler sentences in the novel. That's one of the reasons why I fell in love with this novel. But that was actually also a bit of a coincidence. I'd like to share a little personal story with you about my encounter with your book. That was really quite accidental. This summer, I went on a cycling tour, more or less along the French-Italian border from Nizza, Nice to Torino. And I only wanted to stay one day in Torino and then take a return flight back home to Germany. But then something unpleasant and unexpected happened. I lost my identity card, and so I couldn't take my flight right back before sorting out all these bureaucratic issues. And it took me a whole week to resolve this. So I had a prolonged stay of 1 week at Torino. And this week at Torino, I spent a lot of time looking at the antiquarian bookshops and at the many small street vendors who offered you used books or books on discounts. And so every day, every single day, I went out and I bought at least 2 or 3 books. And on one day, I came across your book. I think it was in Via Po, so Po Street. And I didn't know anything about the title or the author. I just found the cover picture nice and the text on the rear side seemed to be promising, so I bought the book. And just a week later, when I was at home and I started reading, I immediately fell in love. And then I did some research on the internet, and I now found out that there was a German translation just about to be published. And then the whole story started. I made a video, a review video, and we got in touch. But it's all down to this coincidence of the lost ID card somewhere close to the French-Italian border.
How nice. So nice. Thank you for your curiosity. Really wonderful stories happen through books. It has also happened to me in my life that I have stopped at an airport or train station, bought a book by chance, took it with me, and then only discovered over the years that this book has become something very important to me. There are books that I have carried around with me for years, and for me they are like totems, books that I pick up and touch in the hope that their power will transfer to me. Books are truly incredible, magical objects.
Absolutely, these things happen. Books call out to you. So, will the success of your latest novel also have an impact on the availability of your earlier works? So, are any translations of the earlier novels planned? Can the German-speaking or English-speaking readers hope for translations of Il fiuto dello squalo or Madre Tempesta or not?
I don't know yet, David. These are editorial processes that completely escape me. Logics that I don't know also play a role.
Oh, yes. The world of economic decisions is also something that I would prefer to stay away from as much as possible. So let's get back to literature. There is a medieval saying that we are just dwarfs sitting on the shoulders of giants. And this is supposed to mean that everything that we create, including literature, is deeply rooted in or influenced by our cultural heritage, by our predecessors. So that's why I would be interested to get to know who are the giants on whose shoulders you are sitting. Which authors do you particularly appreciate as a reader? And are these the same authors who are role models for you in your own writing process? I know that's 2 questions at once, but I'm sure you can handle it.
Yes, absolutely. I have many masters who would not be happy with me because as a student, I'm a mediocre student, but I have so many authors to thank. When I write, it is because I have read their books, and just reading their words made me believe that I too can do something. I like many authors from my city, Naples. I am very lucky because I live in a city that has always been full of culture. In addition to the great commercial successes, Elena Ferrante's novels are set in my neighborhood, in Gianturco. I live in San Giovanni. We don't live in exactly the same area, but I like Amano Ray, Anna Maria Ortiz, Raffaella Capria. I am very lucky to have had the opportunity to read great authors, more or less contemporary. They were already alive when I was born. We're talking about a few years apart. In other words, a world that I still recognize and with which I can compare myself. Then there are the great authors, including foreign ones, who I loved and love very much. Philip Roth in particular, Curé Michel Houellebecq, each for very different reasons, but also Chuck Palahniuk. Chuck Palahniuk has a parotactic way of writing, with very short sentences. I loved him, of course, maybe even more when I was younger. But also Henry Miller, Bolano, there are so many of them. I definitely like authors who have a very tight, very short breath on the page, in the sense of a very syncopated sentence. I like Agota Christoph, for example. Her City of K trilogy is well known in Italian. I don't know if you know these novels by Agota Christoph. For me, they are among the novels that have made the biggest impression on me, because of the cleanness of the sentences. There's also a very short story of hers that I always recommend reading, called The Illiterate, or David Sedaris, a funny American author. I also like the works of Woody Allen. I like Jewish authors like Philip Roth precisely because they managed to create this contrast between the religiosity of their own family, their own community, and the Western outside world. As soon as they set foot outside the door, they live in a different world to the one they have at home. I like a literature of contrasts, and that's why I really like the American literature of the time. I really like Valeria Luiselli, who wrote this beautiful novel, The Archive of Lost Children, and Guadalupe Nettel, The Only Daughter. In short, they are South American authors who, in my opinion, represent the female literature of the time, but with an incredible power that male authors can only dream of. I believe that women are better at it in these years. I believe that female authors have much more to say and are able to reach depths that men no longer have at their disposal today. And perhaps they are also better at telling stories about the world. Men are very self-centered.
Yes, egoistic or egocentric, probably.
Yes, me excluded, of course. Well, I don't know. We can perhaps tell stories about the world that surrounds us at arm's length. But women think about future generations or about trees. Men just do a lot of navel-gazing. At the moment, I like women's writing better.
Oh, I like very much that you used the word navel gazing, because that's exactly the word I often use to describe why I am currently somewhat disappointed by the current Italian but also German contemporary literature. Often also literature written by authors that have won literary prizes. It's not always the case, but often a lot of it revolves around navel gazing, around the little problems and issues of one's own self, without any perspective that goes beyond one's own nose, without a creative imagination. And I miss the fabulists, the inventors of entire fictional worlds that they describe with an extraordinary power of imagination. Authors like Umberto Eco, who can lay out a whole detailed world before us that actually means something. So I would say there's a lack of really powerful male authors at this level at the moment. Also, as you say, I also noticed that women tend to think beyond the boundaries of our generation much more often, and they tend to have a slightly broader view of the world. So you have shown us a very broad panorama of very different authors. Unfortunately, I don't know some of the names you mentioned, but I will do some research to close my educational gap. So thank you very much for these very valuable suggestions. So at this point, unfortunately, the registration broke, but I think no harm was done because we had reached the end of my list with questions, and Gianni has answered all of them really extensively. And so, yeah, I just like to thank once again Gianni for granting me this interview, and I would just also like to thank you for watching this video. I hope it was interesting. For me, it was sort of very special because actually it was my first interview ever done with an author. But yes, Gianni was great in facilitating my job. And yeah, it was also very special because Gianni was such a nice interview partner, so openly answering all the questions. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hope to see you next time here. Take care. Bye bye and ciao.